So thanks, Raghav. I hope the context is set for this demo. And we're going to, like you see in the screen, we've explained it in the introduction video. What are we going to do? So let's start with the actual process and the hands-on, right? So you can see that I am on my AWS console. We are in the region for Singapore. And with that, you can see that I am on the EKS service console here, when we do not have any clusters actually inside of the EKS service, right?
Yes.
Now, the first task will be actually to create the EKS cluster and then deploy the workloads on top of that, the SockShop application as such, right? So let's start with that. I'm going to head over to a Ubuntu machine. This is my EKSA admin machine.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to use this machine as a regular virtual machine to actually create and execute the commands.
Right.
This machine was installed, if you've been following the Saga series, this machine was installed through Terraform with all the utilities required, for EKS Anywhere demo sessions and all that, and all the blogs actually, right? So it's already preloaded with a lot of software. You can just review the previous blogs and videos of how to actually get this machine up and running. Now, the point that we want to highlight here is that, the first step would be obviously to create certain keys, the RSA keys for my EKS cluster. Now, this in the act of the demo is already done. So I don't want to repeat this step here. What I'm going to do is actually I'm going to take the set of commands. You can see that I'm naming my cluster as C4 EKS AWS 1. And then, just a little bit of, execution here to the point where we run this particular, EKSCTL create cluster command. You can see this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have the kubeconfig generated and placed it in the Ubuntu machine there, right?
Okay.
So the point that I want to also highlight is that there is a EKS ondemand.yaml file, which is, if you, and generally I expect the audience here has already worked with EKS, so you know how to create an EKS cluster, right? So I have a YAML file that will actually help me deploy this cluster, and we'll see that in the action. So let me take this set of commands and come to this point here. Okay. So now I should have the template, which was my on-demand template. Okay. Now converted to a specific template for my cluster, including the cluster name and everything, right?
Right.
And I'll go ahead and start the EKS cluster deployment. This is going to take about roughly whatever, right? 20 to 25 or 30 minutes. And we'll come back once the cluster is already deployed, right?
Sounds good.
Before that, I can also highlight the fact that, let me see, C4. This is the YAML file here, and you can see that the cluster config is already there. I'm just building one single instance. You can have a fleet of instances. For me, since it's a demo, it's a single instance. It's a T2X large instance, right? Yeah, so I'm gonna take the command to create the cluster.
Okay.
And we can paste this command. This will actually generate the cluster on my EKS environment in AWS. Okay.
Right.
Let's go ahead. And you can see that the cluster deployment has started. With that, there should be a cloud permission stack which will be created inside of AWS, and then EKSCTL will orchestrate the entire cluster creation process, right? Unfortunately, we have nothing more to do till the cluster gets created. So I'm going to hit pause here and join back the video session once the cluster is fully created. Okay.
Sounds good, Amber. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so now our EKS cluster has been created. You can see the cluster is fully created. What we did is we ran this command to create the cluster with a certain cluster configuration. And let's take a view on the AWS console. You can see that the cluster name is C4 EKS AWS 1. It's running 1.23 version of Kubernetes. And most importantly, it highlights the fact that the provider is EKS, right? And obviously, I think if the audience has been working with EKS, you will know that you can browse through, look at the cluster details and everything else, right? So now at this stage, Raghavendra, we do have the cluster ready.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But now, in order to deploy persistent workloads on EKS, right, we need a storage provider. And in this case, we mentioned that the storage provider is going to be EBS, right? The default storage class that is actually, in the EKS cluster is not based on EBS, as in the CSI version of EBS. So what we have to do is install the CSI drivers for EBS to start with. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take, we're going to start implementing the CSI drivers on the EKS cluster. And from there on, then we will deploy the EBS drivers and the associated components around the snapshot controller and things like that, right? That will enable us to kind of not only deploy these persistent workloads, but also to take snapshots and all that. So there are a few components that are required to be deployed before we start implementing the SockShop application on the cluster. Make sense?
Makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. So in order to do that, start creating an IAM policy first. Okay. I'll describe what that IAM policy is all about. So I'm going to go to IAM. Okay. And I'm going to go to policies. Okay. And create a policy. Okay. Now I'll head over to the JSON tab itself. See that I can edit my policy here. I'm going to take the policy from my GitHub itself, from the repository, and you can see that the policy allows, for various actions here, right? I'm going to take this particular policy. We will name the policy as Amazon EBS CSI driver. I'm going to head over to my console here and paste the IAM policy here. Okay. And then next review and create policy.
Right.
We'll name the policy as AWS. What should I name it? Yeah. Amazon EBS CSI driver. Okay. So let's name it as this. Amazon EBS CSI driver. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's take this. Yeah. Okay. And let's create this policy. And I'll tell you what this policy will entail and what it will do. Now, since the policy has been created now, I'm going to go back to my EKS service. Okay. Or before that, EKS, the nodes that are running in the EKS cluster, okay, in order to engage with the CSI drivers, it needs to be associated with this policy. So there is an IAM role which gets created automatically when EKS CTL deploys the cluster. So if I search for my roles in the IAM, you will see that there is a IAM role for the node group here, right?
Right.
This one?
Yeah.
Now I'm going to go and select this role. This IAM role is associated with the EC2 instances that make up the EKS cluster. I'm going to attach the set of permissions that we actually created and add permission attach policies. And you can see that I can select my policy that we just created. Yes, CSI driver, and I will attach the policy. Okay. Now the nodes that are a part of the EKS cluster have the required permissions to engage with the CSI driver actually, and do the needful in terms of various things that will happen during backup and restore and whatnot. Okay, makes sense?
Yep.
Okay. Now the next step that we will do is I'm going to head over to document procedure. Now you can see that the first thing that we will do after applying the policy is that I will deploy the EBS CSI driver manifest actually. Okay. So a URL that I can. This is from the Kubernetes project for the CSI driver for EBS, right?
Mhm.
I'll do two things. I'll not only deploy the drivers, but I will also create a storage class on my EKS cluster based on that particular EBS
Yeah.
driver. Okay. So
Yeah.
let me
Yeah.
keep this thing first and just apply. Let me first set my kubectl context properly so that I'm targeting my EKS cluster.
Mhm.
Okay. So if I say kubectl get nodes, I will see that I'm able to see my cluster node. This is the worker node that is running as a part of the EKS cluster. We just have one node for a demo purpose. Like I said, you can have a fleet of many nodes, right? Now, we will, since we have our kubectl now targeted at the EKS cluster, I'm going to take the CSI driver manifest, and to have it easier, sorry, we will apply this manifest here.
Yeah.
And now you can see that the manifest has been applied. As a part of the manifest, there are several resources created in my EKS cluster that allows me to actually deploy the CSI driver, right?
Right.
Clear. We can see the pods for the CSI driver under kube system. So you can see that the two controllers for the EBS CSI drivers are being now created in a container creating state. Just make sure that they are running. Yeah. So you can see that
running. Yeah.
State, right? And as a part of that, basically, you have 6 containers in each of these pods, and there are different kind of containers kind of grouped together, to create the CSI driver controller, which are attacher, provisioner, blah, 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 right? I mean, I don't want to get into the details of that per se. Now, since we have this now, we are going to take and deploy the storage class for AWS EBS, right? Okay. Before I do that, I can also show you quickly what this driver storage class is all about, actually. So you can see that, the provisioner for the storage class is going to be EBS CSI AWS.com, right?
Yeah.
That any persistent volume now that targets the storage class will be deployed through this driver, and the underlying EBS storage will be provisioned, actually, right? As a persistent volume. Okay. So now, oops, sorry. Let me take this command again and paste it here. So the storage class is created, and as a result, if I look at the storage class, you can see that there are 2. One is a GP2 class, which is based in the entry volume of Kubernetes, which we are not going to use. We are going to use the CSI based EBS-SC. Okay. So now you have a cluster. You have a deployment of the EBS CSI driver. You have the storage class. All 3 have been created. I mentioned it here that, don't go ahead with this configuration unless this above condition is satisfied, right? So what are we going to do in this set of commands? You can see that we are going to deploy volume snapshot classes that will allow us to, create snapshots. The snapshot related YAMLs are here. And then the snapshot controller is also going to be deployed now. Snapshot controller is nothing but it's based on an external project. It's based on an external project called as external snapshotter. Okay, that allows Kubernetes to engage and with the external snapshotter and then create those snapshots, actually, right? It's an open source project basically. Now let's take this particular set of commands. And like I said, it will help us deploy the the volume snapshot prerequisites, actually, right? Yeah. And at the end of this command structure, you can also see that I'm running 2 more commands, which is actually to patch the storage class EBS-SC as the default storage class.
Right.
Right now, the GP2 is the default entry volume is the default storage class. I'm just making sure that the EBS-SC becomes the default storage class. I hope I've copied these commands. Nevertheless, I'll go ahead and I'll paste them here, right? And you'll see that it takes a couple of seconds, and then we should be done with this, right?
Mhm.
Okay. While I can show you what the snapshot controller looks like, but for now I'll just kind of skip that. Now at this stage, our cluster is fully ready.
Mhm.
Now to integrate this with Power Protect, Power Protect needs to have a service account
Mhm.
on my cluster, any cluster. So in this case, the target cluster is EKS.
Mhm.
And then it needs a service account and the required permissions in the form of RBAC for it to allow to actually deploy the necessary Power Protect controller components and also do the backup and restore jobs as CRDs. Actually, for now we will come back to this step later on when we've finished deploying our application and everything else. Actually, we'll keep this step right now. We'll omit this step and we'll come back to this. Is it okay?
Yeah, sounds fine. Yeah.
Okay, so now we do have the cluster ready and everything is done. Let me just verify this. kubectl get pods minus compute system. Okay, so you can see the snapshot controllers are also running.
Yeah.
And the CSI controllers are also running, right? And the storage class is also there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, EBS.
Yeah, we can see the EBS as the default now, right? Yeah.
Okay. So let's take a pause on this video and we will join you with the next video, which will explain the creation of the EKS cluster now. So now the next task basically in the sequence would be to create the EKS
Deploy the application, right?
on premises, right? Okay, see you in the next video.